I remember picking up the Amityville Horror by Jay Anson and thinking, alright, let's see what all the fuss is about. I'd heard the hype for years. Some say it's the creepiest true story out there. Others call it the biggest hoax in horror history. I hadn't watched the movie, never bothered, so I was basically walking in blind, except for the overall premise. A family moves into a house where a brutal murder happened, and within a month they run for their lives. Supposedly, the place was crawling with evil spirits. People either buy that or tear it apart. My take was somewhere in the middle. The book itself is short, maybe a couple hundred pages, so I breezed through it in a weekend. I expected a slow build, but Jay Anson crams a lot of weirdness into a short time frame. Right away, he sets the stage. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murders his entire family in their home at 112 Ocean Avenue. Parents, siblings, everyone. The following year, George and Kathy Lutz show up, get the house for a bargain, and think they've scored their dream property. Then all hell breaks loose. That's the bare-bones timeline. What I didn't expect was how quickly the story escalates. You know when a horror movie tries so hard to scare you in the first 10 minutes, it almost becomes funny? At times, the Amityville Horror gave me that vibe. It's like, door ripped off hinges one night, windows flung open the next, then the black toilet water, the hidden red room in the basement, Kathy floating off her bed, random chills in the house that only George feels. Even if you're fully open to the paranormal, you might be thinking, does everything have to happen that fast? Jay Anson's writing is straightforward, almost documentary style. He logs each day, showing how the Lutz family goes from, yay, we got a sweet deal on this house, to we're literally fleeing in the middle of the night because the devil is messing with us. That's the big selling point. They only lasted 28 days before escaping. Supposedly, they left clothes, furniture, personal items behind, never to return. Naturally, it sparked debates everywhere. People wanted to know, why so dramatic? Could it be real? Did they just want attention or book deals? I'm not out here to say it's all fake, but I do raise an eyebrow at certain moments. For instance, the father of the family, George Lutz, supposedly wakes up every night at 3:15 a.m., hearing noises. We're talking day after day with no explanation. He wanders around the house, finds the front door blown off its frame. Another time, the dog's chain gets tangled, or the windows unlatch themselves. Add to that, Father Mancuso, the priest who blessed the house, claims he heard a voice telling him, get out, and then he ends up with a weird rash and fever afterward. All these incidents pile up, giving the impression that some massive demonic force is just messing with everyone in a million ways. I'd be lying if I said it didn't creep me out. The idea of a house actively trying to torment you is terrifying. It's not just ghostly footsteps. It's violent, destructive poltergeist-level stuff. But that's also why some folks roll their eyes. Levitation is a big one. The book states that Kathy and even one of the kids levitated off their beds. If you believe in spirits, maybe you can stretch that far. If you're on the skeptical side, you'll probably think they made it up or exaggerated. There's no middle ground with that claim. It's either real or it's not. Then there's the red room discovery in the basement. George stumbles on it behind a concealed wall. Everything's painted bright red, and the dog freaks out whenever it's near that area. It's implied the space was used for who knows what, maybe satanic rituals or something that left a bad vibe behind. For me, that's the stuff of classic haunted house lore. Hidden rooms, leftover stains from old tragedies, possible gateways to something dark. I can see it fueling nightmares. But as a real-life scenario, I can also see a basement that was painted red for some bizarre reason. Not necessarily proof of the devil, just weird decor choices. As the days go on in the book, the tension supposedly takes a toll on the family's mental health. George stops going to work, doesn't shower, gets obsessed with the fireplace. Kathy feels drained, seeing images of the DeFeo murders in her dreams, imagining figures in windows. The kids start acting odd, especially the youngest, Missy, who apparently has an imaginary friend named Jody, a giant pig with red eyes lurking around the property. That alone is enough to spook you. A child claiming a demon pig is her buddy. In any normal situation, you'd be calling a therapist, but in the book, It's just another day of something's out to get us. The fact that Father Mancuso tried to stay involved, calling them, telling them they should leave the house, adds a layer of supposed authenticity. A priest coming down with random illnesses is prime horror material. There's talk about him wanting to bless the house again, but each time the phone line's cut off or he gets severely sick, the narrative implies some strong demonic presence won't let him intervene. From a purely story perspective, it's effective, keeps the dread building. Every time Father Mancuso tries to do the right thing, the house retaliates. At a certain point, one has to wonder, could it be a group panic? Psychological stress can do wild things. They bought a murder house. Maybe that knowledge burrowed into their minds and cranked up their paranoia. Throw in money struggles, freezing winter nights, 3 kids, plus the Catholic guilt factor. It's a perfect storm for freaking out at every creak. I'm not discounting the possibility of legitimate hauntings. I'm just acknowledging the real-world factors that might explain why George or Kathy felt doomed from the start. Jay Anson, for his part, doesn't give a nuanced look into the family's psyche. He basically rattles off each event day by day, which can feel sensational. One chapter, Kathy finds the toilets filled with black water. Next chapter, George sees a pig's face in the window. Then the walls ooze green slime. Then Father Mancuso has another breakdown. It's entertaining, but it does come across as horror highlights, leaving me wondering if we're missing the everyday moments in between. The review I read pointed this out too. The pacing's so quick, you don't get a deeper sense of who these people are and why they interpret everything as malicious. You just see them in crisis mode nonstop. Then there's the question, is every spirit in that house truly evil? The book lumps everything into bad news, but some events sound more neutral, like Kathy smelling perfume and feeling a gentle hug. That could be a friendly presence. She's immediately freaked, though, convinced it's part of the demonic circus. It's a common trope. If a place has a dark past, any supernatural encounter gets labeled evil. The review you shared said something similar, pointing out that not all ghosts have to be demonic. Maybe the Lutz family jumped to conclusions. Father Mancuso's health decline feels more superstitious. He blesses the house once, hears, get out, and from then on, he's convinced something targeted him. He tries to warn George and Kathy, but can't get through. The phone lines apparently go haywire. In the 1970s, that might have been common. Phone lines weren't exactly reliable in winter storms, especially on Long Island. But the book wants you to believe the house is actively sabotaging communications. This horror logic, sometimes it works, sometimes it feels forced. I half expected the house to start controlling the radio or messing with the TV, but that's not in the text. Instead, you get scenes of George's personality changing, Kathy's nightmares intensifying, and the kids adopting weird behavior. If you're looking for prime horror scenes, The Last Night is the big show. The Lutzes claim a final burst of chaos forced them to abandon everything. Doors slam, the temperature plunges, disembodied voices roar. They run outside in their pajamas. Jay Anson doesn't detail every second, but it's enough to conjure an image of a frantic family busting out at 3 a.m., not even locking the door behind them. And that's the end. They relocate. The final part of the book briefly mentions investigators coming in, verifying supernatural activity, concluding the place is negative, then it just ends. No grand exorcism, no resolution, just, yep, it's haunted. The end, that abrupt finish gave me a weird sense of whiplash. It's like the story's in fifth gear and screeches to a halt. They're out, they're safe, end of story. Maybe that's how it really happened. Or maybe Jay Anson wanted to keep an aura of mystery. In a typical horror novel, you'd expect a showdown or a concluding explanation. This one leaves it hanging. The Lutzes apparently stuck to their guns, maintaining that everything was real. Critics hammered them, found inconsistencies in their timeline, pointed to the possibility they invented it to get out of mortgage payments. One rumor claims they teamed up with a lawyer to create a bestseller. Who knows? Here's what I found interesting. The book's biggest push for authenticity is that multiple people, friends, relatives, the priest, also reported strange events. It's not just the Lutzes. The problem is none of that is thoroughly documented in the text. It's more like so-and-so visited and felt chills, or a relative came over and had nightmares. That's anecdotal. Maybe that's enough to make you believe, or maybe it's too vague. The family stands by it, though. In interviews post-publication, they insisted they didn't fake anything. On the other hand, skeptics dissected the house's structure, concluding the windows were old, the doors were old, so maybe they naturally stuck or fell off. The slime might have been mold or sewage backups. The flies in the attic, another detail from the book, might have been a seasonal infestation. These rational explanations clash with the dramatic retelling. The real question: why does the Amityville horror still hold such a big place in pop culture? Probably because it taps into that universal fear. What if the place you call home is unsafe? Not from intruders, but from something you can't see or fight. People talk about haunted hotels or insane asylums, but this is a suburban home on a regular street, with neighbors just down the road. That sense of normalcy turning against you creeps people out. Plus, you have the real murders that happen there, fueling the idea that leftover energy might be lingering. I also think the book's immediate success had to do with timing. It came out in the late 70s, right after The Exorcist, and around the same era as other big occult/possession stories hitting mainstream culture. People were primed to believe in demonic forces and poltergeists. The tagline, based on a true story, was a marketing goldmine. So you combine a real murder case with a family's harrowing 28-day meltdown, write it in a dramatic day-by-day style, and it's guaranteed to get attention. I see the same formula repeated in modern horror marketing. Inspired by true events, it's a powerful hook. Doesn't matter if only 10% is factual. Audiences get that extra jolt thinking it might have happened. The Amityville horror basically pioneered that wave. Whether you trust it or not, you can't deny its cultural impact. There's been an endless chain of movies, sequels, reboots, documentaries, paranormal investigations, and lawsuits about who owns the rights to the story. The house itself is still there, though the address was changed to discourage tourists. Owners over the years insisted it's not haunted, or at least they never experienced anything like the Lutz family described. So you get this contradiction. The most famous haunted house in America, where subsequent owners say, "We had no issues," that fuels more debate. Now, about the book's tone, the review I read gave it a 7.5/10, mostly because it felt rushed. I get that. If you're expecting a deep character piece, you won't find it. It's basically a bullet list of horrifying incidents. Some folks appreciate that. It moves fast and never bores you. Others want more backstory on the family, more exploration of why these events traumatized them so badly. Jay Anson just wasn't that kind of writer. He wanted to focus on the action. I can picture him with a big timeline on his desk, thinking, day 1, the family unpacks. Day 2, Father Mancuso gets sick. Day 3, front door is broken. It reads like that, and the ending, as I said, is abrupt. The Lutz family flees. Investigators come in, confirm something dark lingers there, fade to black. I found that anticlimactic, but if the Lutz story is real, that's simply what happened. Real life doesn't always tie things up nicely. At the same time, for a horror narrative, it might leave you wanting more. The bigger question is whether it genuinely scares you. For me, certain parts were unnerving. The pig eyes, the slime, the hidden room, the sense that something was draining Kathy's and George's energy. But there's also a B-movie cheesiness to it if you read it today. Horror has evolved. We're used to more psychological layering or subtlety. The Amityville horror is blunt. Possibly that's why some readers look back on it now and say, "I can't believe I found this terrifying," but others still swear it's one of the creepiest things ever. It depends on personal taste and how much you buy into the true story label. If we compare it to modern haunted house books, like those by Shirley Jackson or Richard Matheson, Jay Anson's approach is more in your face. Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House creeps up on you psychologically, leaving you guessing. The Amityville horror slams you with poltergeist mania from the first couple pages. Different styles, different eras, both influential but in distinct ways. One part that stuck with me is the mention of how the children reacted. The older boys apparently started misbehaving in ways they never had before. Missy got attached to that pig entity. If there's any truth to that, I find it unsettling. Kids are often more susceptible or in tune with weird vibes. Some might argue they also have active imaginations. Either way, children seeing bizarre things in a home is a classic horror device, but it's also something that comes up in actual ghost stories. If you believe in ghosts, maybe that's legit. If not, you can chalk it up to impressionable kids in a stressful environment. The vibe of the story reminded me of being inside a chaotic production. If you read behind-the-scenes stuff about certain film sets or TV shows with rumored curses, you see a pattern. Equipment fails, people get weirdly injured, and everyone wonders if some malicious force is at play. The Amityville horror reads like that. Constant accidents, missing items, uneasy feelings in the basement, bizarre smells upstairs. The tension keeps piling. Then the final straw hits, some terrifying event that sends them running. What also intrigued me is how the book tries to paint Father Mancuso as a man deeply shaken. He's not your typical fearless exorcist. He's basically traumatized, physically ill, and borderline helpless against the house. That inverts the usual priest saves the day trope. Instead of him bursting in with holy water and banishing evil, he's holed up in his own apartment, dealing with fevers and sores on his hands, as if something cursed him. It adds a twist. No one's swooping in to help the family. They're on their own. Toward the end, the Lutzes contact a medium who supposedly senses ancient burial grounds or negative forces. She also doesn't do much beyond confirming, yeah, it's bad in here, so the Lutzes just keep suffering until the final night. If you're looking for a big exorcism showdown, you won't find it. If that's your favorite brand of horror, you might be disappointed. The story's built on an escalating dread that doesn't resolve so much as it just snaps. They leave done deal. No attempt to fight or purge the ghosts. Maybe that's realistic. If I were in a house like that, I'd bail too, not stick around for a final confrontation. The review you shared questioned the validity of the haunting because the haunting ends so abruptly. The family literally just leaves. But if you think about it logically, what else can they do? They're not demon hunters. They're normal people in over their heads. If the events are true, it makes sense they'd say, screw this, we're out. Then they sold the story to Jay Anson, who wrote it up. If it's all a con, they basically staged a dramatic exit for the sake of selling a true ghost story. I see arguments both ways. One segment of the book that always gets attention is the phenomenon at 3:15 a.m. George Lutz wakes up each night at that exact time, the same time Ronald DeFeo supposedly carried out the murders. It's a neat connection if it's real. The logic is, maybe the house or the spirits are reenacting or referencing the murder's timeline. The cinematic, for sure. But as a real-life detail, it's also suspiciously perfect for a haunting story. That's why so many critics question it. They see it as too convenient, too on the nose. Then there are details that are just bizarre, like pig footprints in the snow outside Missy's window. The family apparently found hoof prints leading away. You read that and think, what, is the demon pig physically walking around the yard? The mental image is so outlandish. If I woke up and saw pig tracks outside my house, I'd probably assume a neighbor's pet pig got loose before I jumped to the demonic entity conclusion. But of course, the Amityville horror wants you to think it's Jody the pig demon. A big chunk of the story is about psychological manipulation. George's demeanor changes, making him moody and aggressive. Kathy feels physically violated by unseen forces. That angle at least resonates with typical poltergeist or demonic possession accounts. Spirits messing with your emotions, draining your energy. If you're a fan of that subgenre, you'll find a lot to latch onto here. If you're a cynic, you might just see a couple dealing with stress and taking it out on each other, reading malevolent intent into every random occurrence. Another part that bugged me, the black toilets. Kathy finds them stained or covered in some dark substance. The book basically says it's a sign of supernatural tampering. I sat there thinking, couldn't that just be weird plumbing? A rust issue or some kind of algae? Admittedly, it's odd if it happened overnight, but I've seen old houses with messed up water systems. Doesn't always mean ghosts are behind it. The same goes for random cold spots. Maybe the insulation sucks. The Lutzes moved in during December. Long Island winters aren't a joke. If the heating system was on the fritz, no wonder George felt cold. The fact that so many of these signs can be explained away is exactly why the debate never ends. People who want to believe in a demonic presence have enough material to say, "Look at how intense it all got." Skeptics can counter with rational explanations. Then you have the leftover question. What about the missing money? What about doors ripped from hinges? The door thing especially stands out. If that happened in real life, you'd expect an insurance claim or a police report. Where's the paperwork? After finishing the book, I read some commentary from investigators who said the timeline in the Amityville horror doesn't match weather reports or local police logs. For instance, the book claims it snowed on a certain day, but historical records say no. That weakens the "it's all true" stance. Also, neighbors said they never saw or heard anything unusual. Meanwhile, the Lutzes insisted they basically got terrorized every night. Could neighbors have missed all that? Possibly. Or maybe it wasn't as loud and obvious as the book implies. The review from Batty Book Reviews questions whether the Lutz family exaggerated for sensationalism. Honestly, I can see it. Jay Anson had a bestseller on his hands. The 1979 film adaptation made serious money. That's a big incentive to amp up the horror. The Lutzes, even if they experienced some weird stuff, might have realized they could profit by going bigger with each claim. That doesn't mean nothing happened. It means we might be looking at a kernel of truth inflated into a circus. Still, people love the Amityville horror for exactly that reason. It's a ride, full of shocking moments. Even if it's pure fiction, it's entertaining. And it shaped the haunted house genre in pop culture. Without it, we might not have the same mainstream appetite for true haunting stories. It paved the way for stuff like Paranormal Activity, where the claim of found footage made it scarier. For me, the highlight is the sense of suffocation. The family can't escape the house's influence until they physically leave. Every attempt at normalcy fails. Kathy tries to go about daily life, but she's plagued by nightmares. George tries to keep his business running, but he can't drag himself out of bed. Father Mancuso tries to help, but he's sidelined by bizarre illnesses. That overarching doom saturates the book's short length. I can see why it left an impression on readers in the 70s. If I had to summarize the Amityville horror in a single statement, I'd say it's a punchy, sensational account of a month-long meltdown in a murder house, either orchestrated by sinister forces or by the Lutz's overactive imaginations, and possibly a drive for profit. It's not subtle. It's not a character study. It's more like a bullet train of ghostly events. Take it or leave it. If you're skeptical, you'll pick it apart. If you're open-minded, you might end up sleeping with the lights on. Do I recommend the book? Sure, if you like horror or you're curious about the roots of modern haunted house hype. It's not going to give you deep insights into the DeFeo murders or a methodical approach to the supernatural. It's pure old-school shock factor. You'll get black toilets, demon pigs, hidden rooms, and a freaked-out priest. You won't get a happy ending or a thorough resolution. The Lutzes basically vanish off the page, letting investigators claim, yes, it's haunted, then calling it a day. What hits hardest is the question of how real it is. That's what keeps people talking. Any random haunted house novel might be fun, but once you slap "based on a true story" on the cover, folks start analyzing every detail. You get researchers pulling property records, analyzing phone logs, comparing the Lutz family's statements. That's the magnetism of the Amityville horror. It merges true crime with ghost story. People want to solve that puzzle. Did a demon pig truly torment a family? Or did they spin a tall tale? The leftover murder factor also sets it apart. This wasn't just an empty old mansion. 6 people died in that house. If you believe in spiritual residue, that's a giant bullseye for negative energy. But plenty of homes have dark pasts without turning into demon playgrounds. So either this house was uniquely cursed, or the Lutzes brought their own baggage. The book never acknowledges rational possibilities. It's locked into the "there's something evil here" viewpoint. The aftermath is equally interesting. Later owners sued or tried to sue for misrepresentations. Some said the house was never haunted at all. Others tried to distance themselves from the circus. The Lutzes did interviews, stuck by their story, and then eventually parted ways with the media. Jay Anson died not long after the book's publication, so we never got a follow-up from him. The story basically floats in this realm of partial acceptance, partial denial. Movies keep being made, each more over the top than the last, but the original book remains the core text. If you read it now, you might laugh at some parts. The green slime, the red eyes pig, the dramatic nightly wake-ups. It can feel like a product of its era, when people were more gullible about the paranormal. But some fans argue it's still terrifying if you let yourself believe. It might hinge on your personal threshold for the supernatural. I've heard some people say they got nightmares for weeks after reading it, because the concept of your own house betraying you hits too close to home. Whether you're a horror junkie or a curious newbie, the Amityville Horror is a piece of genre history. It won't blow your mind with fancy writing or deep characters, but it'll give you a quick, intense read. For me, the biggest takeaway is how easily fear can spiral. One creaking door can turn into a full-blown haunting if you're already on edge. Real murder history plus a claustrophobic house plus Catholic guilt plus winter isolation can breed the perfect storm of terror. That's what the Lutzes claim happened. In the end, do I fully believe them? Not really. Some of it might be true. Maybe they heard spooky noises or felt a presence. But the day-to-day catastrophes feel too orchestrated. The review I read joked about them possibly mixing up normal household problems. Bad plumbing, old doors, financial stress with demonic sabotage. I get that. If you're desperate or you've psyched yourself out, everything looks like a sign from the underworld. Still, I won't dismiss the possibility that weird stuff happened. If you talk to some investigators, they'll swear they recorded evidence. If you watch certain documentaries, you'll see grainy photos of ghost-like forms in the house. That's enough to keep the legend alive. Then you read about neighbors or new owners who say, "We live there, no big deal." That's why the Amityville Horror never dies. Both sides keep feeding the myth. Believers amplify the spookiness, skeptics refute it, and the story grows bigger and bigger. Bottom line, if you're looking for a classic haunted house narrative with maximum drama, read it. The tension is relentless, and it's short enough to devour in a day. Just don't expect definitive proof. It's not that kind of book. It's a snapshot of a family's alleged 28-day nightmare, ending in them running out the door. Then you're left with a question mark. Was it demonic, mental, or a money grab? That ambiguity might be the scariest part. Never really knowing who or what to believe. Given its cultural impact, you kind of owe it to yourself as a horror fan to check it out. Even if you end up scoffing at the pig eyes in the window, at least you'll understand why people still talk about it decades later. There's a reason it spawned countless spin-offs. It was a pioneer in marketing real-life horror, and it's still a reference point in haunted house lore. People mention Amityville and instantly conjure images of demonic windows, malicious spirits, and 3 a.m. terror. That's a testament to how deeply it's embedded in pop culture. After reading, I was left half creeped, half skeptical. The next time I heard a bump in the night, I thought of George Lutz prowling around with a lantern at 3:15 a.m. The book definitely lodged itself into my brain, but I also recognized the many holes in the story. If you approach it as an entertaining piece of horror, it works. If you want airtight documentation, you'll be frustrated. Maybe that's the legacy of the Amityville Horror. It merges real murder with alleged demonic chaos, leaving a messy puzzle no one can solve. But it sure sells copies, and it sure keeps people talking. That's pretty much where I stand. It's worth the read, but go in knowing it's flashy, quick, and potentially exaggerated. You'll find plenty of holy crap moments. You'll also find yourself questioning half of them. In the end, the biggest question is whether the Lutzes truly faced something supernatural or just found themselves in a whirlwind of stress and hype. Jay Anson's book doesn't solve that. It just fuels the fire. And decades later, the Amityville Horror still rides the wave of that controversy, perched on the line between terrifying truth and sensational fiction.